Oh, hello. People already talking to me in the chat. Well, for those who are here, welcome. I'll give a minute or so just for everybody to come in, but really delighted to welcome you all to this track of challenging orthodoxy, which is can be a really interesting topic because of all of the areas that it can inflame. What does challenging orthodoxy mean to me? Quite a lot of things, seeing beyond the superficial, allowing yourself to ultimately envision or see things that have sometimes very little evidence, maybe just an idea or a little bit of something that alludes to it, and having the confidence to sort of go with that. Getting into trouble, opposing the status quo, quite a few things. So I'm really interested to see what this set of talks generates. Julius, coming all the way from Germany, Dusseldorf in Germany, will be starting us off today. And on that theme of, getting into trouble, Julius is going to talk to us about some of the social aspects of challenging orthodoxy, which can be the barrier, I suppose, to people trying to do so, because it does cause upset. You can create conflict. Julius, do you want to give us a quick introduction, a little bit about yourself, perhaps the world that you come from that leads you to talk about what you want to tell us today, and then fly on into your talk, into your slides.
Yeah, so my name is Julius Gamani. I've been at Accenture for the last 10 years as a software developer and architect. And so I've been working on different projects, different teams. And then when it comes to challenging, I interpret that as disagreeing with people, but in a certain way. So some disagreements are useful and productive, some are just useless, as in we have the term trolling these days. So knowing when to make that difference.
Fantastic, sounds really good. I will also mention one thing. So we've got a general format that you'll find across the other talks, where you're going to be seeing 15 minutes of a talk with 15 minutes of discussion. We decided to challenge the orthodoxy of that right from the beginning. We're going to do 15 minutes back to back with just a couple of burning questions. So I'm going to put in a request for everybody as we're going along, throw in your questions in the chat. I'm going to randomly pick what that burning question is. Right at the end, we're going to have, because it's quite a sort of interesting topic, we're going to have one long session of question and answer where we can dip into one talk, sort of make connections between each one of them. So feel free. I'll hand over to you, Julius, now for your slides.
All right, so I'll be using the the online widely mapping tool. So let's see how that goes. Hopefully it's still there. So I have some maps prepared, and my starting point was to consider just the words. What is challenge? What is orthodoxy? To set up the scene for these users and user needs. Question, can you see my screen? Okay, good. So then I'll start with this component of challenge. And like I said, I take that to mean to disagree with someone, and the orthodoxy is an accepted opinion or a belief. So then the next part is, okay, who am I disagreeing with? And that's where the users come in. So I have here an individual, so I can disagree with myself. So I look in my environment, something's changed. My habitual beliefs that I had before are no longer valid. So then I have to disagree with those and see how to change those. I can disagree with you, Damien, or whoever. And then other people can disagree with me as well. And then there is also a group here, or a collective, where groups are against other groups, well, disagreeing. So the next part is, okay, how do I link these two together? So what are the user needs for these two? And one that I do have is to always improve our the way we observe and the way we orient. So this is Boyd's OODA loop. So our decisions and actions depend on how we see the world and what we observe. For that, so I left it generic, improve. And then the next part is to preserve our positive and negative feedback loops. So this is in the sense of Sun Tzu. I know it's a bit theoretical, but the positive feedback loops tell us that we are going in the right direction, that our actions are having the right effects in the environment, and so we can continue doing that. With the negative feedback loops, that's the information we get that tells us the actions we've done do not produce the desired effects. And so we can adjust and fill up this gap. So if, for those who already know the gameplays in wordly mapping, you can do an exercise to see which gameplays target the positive feedback loops and which gameplays target the negative ones. One of them is like this reinforcing the inertia of someone else, of your opponent, that messes up their positive feedback loops, and they just continue doing that. And then they cannot readjust to reality unless it's too late. Then on the negative feedback loops, there is this, the ILC gameplay, innovate, leverage, commoditize. It's one of the things that's recommended, but to guard against that, you just, one way is to cut off the data for this event, and then they don't get anything. They don't learn anything from the encounters, and they cannot predict how you're going to react. So all these, I think the two most important things. If you don't get anything from my talk, just take away those two things and you'll be fine. The other one is we want the ideas to be able to stand by themselves. So it could be an idea or it could be something that you're doing. And then for that, you need some disagreements to take place. So I'll go over then to this submap that I have right here. And so we have these two things, the challenger and the initiator. So I can initiate something, or the status quo, I found it like that. And then I need to challenge that. I need to disagree with that. So in order to do that, communication has to take place. So if I'm the challenger, I need to challenge. And then if I'm the one who initiated this idea, I need to have the idea rejected or accepted or adjusted in some kind of way. But communication has to take place. Question, is that big enough? Should I make it bigger? Okay, I'll try that. Okay, so then, when we talk about something, so now we're talking about challenging and disagreements. So that is the topic under discussion. So we need to have that, and we need to understand this thing. So like someone said, the map is not the territory. So the map of France is useful, but it is not actually France. So these two things we do need, and we need a willingness to challenge on our side, and also a willingness to be challenged if I was the initiator. So how do I react when someone challenges me? I just get upset. So if we have time, we can go into that a little bit. And so we also need to know how to challenge. Like I said, what makes a good challenge and what makes a bad one. And then we need to also present what we do challenge. I mean, if you disagree with me and you don't say anything, okay, forever hold your peace. But you need to also present that so that I have time to also react to that. Then if we look at this willingness to be challenged, the interesting part for me was to realize that there are also these two parts. And the interesting thing was that, yeah, there are these two parties, but they're using the same value chain, so to speak, but just from different sides, different angles. So one part is, why does challenging matter to us? Or why does it matter to me? And for that, because I could just go through the world oblivious, why do I need to challenge anything? And so far for that one, we have this, I don't know how they call it these days, but this feeling of moral responsibility, and to realize that the benefits are more than my self-interests. So if I only care about my self-interests, who cares about challenging something? So the second part is the environment that we're in, used to teams. And so there are many more environments, but this is where I spent most of my time. And so they could be safe or unsafe, which is why I think this question of why does it matter to me seems so important. The safe and unsafe, yeah, I'll just leave those as the 5 dysfunctions. So if it's in a safe place, we have these, at least these 5 elements. There's trust, there's productive conflict, we are committed to our goals, we're accountable to one another, and we care about the team's results rather than our own individual results. Sometimes there's conflict between the two. So what do you choose? Yeah, the teams and projects I've been on have been diverse in their safety and unsafety. And it's always a spectrum. But regardless of where you are or where I've been, I found answering this question has always been the topmost part. And for that one, what does it need? These are the values. So I'm using virtue. It's an old-fashioned word, but let's say being open, being willing to be challenged. Do I want the ideas to be challenged, or do I just get frustrated that I cannot get you to agree with me? And also this sense that, yeah, I could be wrong. I'm going forwards. If anything comes up, you'll let me know. Then we have, okay, these virtues need the human virtues and vices to compare and contrast. And then we have, yeah, I'll just not say much. Then we have examples and role models. So if I see how you challenge or how you're willing to be challenged, then I can take that as my example. We've seen in the past also from histories and biographies that also inspires us. And then let's not forget literature is also important. So if I cannot find any role models, then I'm going to go to my fiction and find some rebels there who inspire me to disagree with you, for example, regardless of how safe or unsafe the environment is. So if I have something like this, then I'm able to influence it in a certain way if it's just for myself or for the team that I'm part of. Yeah, that was one of the most key things, I think. Then for these other parts, I don't know if we still have time, but but one part is there are these, I need to understand the thing that's being talked about before I can challenge it. And for that, there is the classical, and how I call it classical tools, where you have arguments, you have propositions, you have terms, and these make it easier to understand something and also to challenge. So if you say some, the way we're talking about challenge now as a term, I'm using it to just mean I'm disagreeing with you, but I can also go to the gym this week, lift 10 kilos, and next week I say I'm going to challenge myself to lift 50 kilos. But that's not the way I'm using challenge. So that has to come in here for you to understand, and then you can disagree with me if you want. So one quote from Samuel Johnson, someone told him, I don't understand what you're saying. And he said, yeah, I gave you an argument. I'm not obliged to give you understanding. So, so I found that quite funny. So once we understand, then we can disagree. So we also use the same tools. And then when we come to disagreeing, well, how does the analysis look like? Is it complete? Is it illogical, as in the propositions don't follow to the conclusions? And then we have to look at the premises themselves. Are they defective? Are they valid? Being uninformed and also being misinformed. So misinformed is, this is not true. You're saying something that's that doesn't match reality. And uninformed is you're missing a piece of information that's relevant to the problem you're solving. So my work has always been on backend systems. So if someone tells me I'm uninformed on user interfaces, I'll say, yeah, thank you, but that's not relevant to my problem. So this is where also these disagreeing with maps comes in. So you can tell me, oh, I'm missing a component. That's this misinformed part, but it doesn't sting as much if you say this component is in the wrong place compared to when you're saying, oh, Julius, you're misinformed about this thing. So it doesn't sting so much, personally speaking. Then uninformed is also maybe the component is in the wrong place, or it's more revolved as you think. So that is interesting. Then, yeah, again, one example and one quote from history. Edmund Burke was arguing against one of the pamphlets, the State of the Nations, and then he just had this little sentence say that, okay, to assume you to convince us, you have to assume your facts, but if you follow his facts, then they don't lead to the conclusion. So that is a good, I think it's a good challenge. The others are just, I cannot do anything about it. So the other important component is to be able to see multiple views. And this is where Wordly maps and other tools like Goldratt's thinking process, where they help so much. Because then they allow us to see the different sides at the same time. So that that's before we finish. I don't know if anyone knows about Goldratt's. I know Simon doesn't like the matrices, but I love these matrices, and I think he'd love them too. So they look like this. So on the one axis, there is the, I can't remember how to do that. So let's do this. But I'll just present the matrix and stop there. I've run out of time. At the bottom, we have the problem, which is, do we change here or do we not change? There are positive consequences for not changing, but there are also negative consequences. Up here, there are positive things if we do change, and also the solution can bring about negative consequences. So this, I would summarize the things we have and want, the things we do have and don't want. And then here, it's the solution. It gives us everything that we do want but don't have, but it can come with its own problems. So yeah, the status quo and orthodoxy, there are already some benefits to it, but it's not 100% beneficial. There are some problems with it, and this helps us to map out on what we can do with these things. So I'll end there and then take questions.
Brilliant, Julius. Quite a few things going through my mind there on my interface to this whole area is trying to map negotiations, specifically, what factors should I be able to use as levers, which things should I offer as part of the negotiation next. And the difficulty is the mapping of human intent, right? It's great when we're doing things that are tangible, fixed, and where we can measure. When we decide that a thing has this particular quality, usually we can agree on what that quality is, whereas when it comes to a human, it's a little bit subjective. So I find that interesting. A couple of comments, quite a few people asking, they really want to see the text. And I think when we go through in the sort of larger question answering session, maybe we can zoom in. The main question people seem to be asking is around the placement on the x-axis. So how you determine where something sits on the x and what that really means from a, I think on this one, you've got universally accepted theory. Earlier on, it wasn't quite clear whether that was Genesis sort of or not. As far as a burning question, I want to throw this to Andy and Jackie, just in the interests of time. I want us to get one. Do you have anything burning? Any insights, thoughts just around what you've seen so far? Andy, Jackie, this is.
I think
Jackie,
this is the same
raised your
question for me as we see in the chat, which is how you reason around what to place where on the evolution axis. Would love to hear more about that, especially about this team sort of feeling safe or not safe, for example, was a good example that I was also wondering about.
Yep. So I placed them here because at least what I've seen so far, teams that have unsafe environments, as the psychological safety, are more common than the ones that are quite safe. Or maybe that's the world I've been in. So that's why I've placed them on this side. So that's the only reason. More common, not as common. Does that help?
Yes, that's a yes from Andy. So I think this is like a whole 1 hour workshop. I think you're going to have to offer people a workshop on this. We'll dive back into this in the more general sort of question and answer. I think some people have some reasonably technical questions that we can get into. For now, I want to introduce Andy. How are you, Andy?
I'm good, thank you.
Where are you speaking to us from today?
I am in the small town of Landskrona in Sweden, south of Sweden.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to give yourself, give a quick sort of intro, a little bit of context and domain for us?
So I'm Andy Nordgren, and I've been working in the technology and games field for a really long time now. I'm currently at Unity Technologies. Unity makes a game engine and supporting services to create and operate games. If you play games, some of them are definitely made with Unity. And I've been thinking about participation and agency and how both customers interact with products and also how teams interact internally in companies for a very long time. And so today I want to show how I used mapping to solve an internal problem that was present a few years ago when I joined Unity. But I think this could have been a story from more or less any fast growing company in the technology field. So I can share my screen here. Let's see if I can. Yes, I can. Here we go. So today is about how we decided to build an API platform after Wordly mapping integrations of between different services as a trust value chain problem. And of course, this comes with a map. And I'm gonna take you through it live. Any questions before I dive into that?
No, nothing here. I love all this live mapping that we're seeing today. I think we had one session across the 36. Yeah, crack on, looks good. All
right. So basically the environment that I came into was a really, fast growing, pretty small at the time, very networked and distributed organization where most teams were, due to the nature of where the company was at, they were really optimizing for fast results. And that by definition meant working within the sphere of control that you and your team had yourselves. And there was actually a kind of an orthodoxy at the time at the company, at least in some parts of the company, which was don't try to build things that have too many dependencies, right? And this starts to become a problem when the user needs some application feature, which we have here. And we assume for the purposes of this mapping exercise that it's a useful feature. And this useful, we have some proof that it's useful, right? For the purpose of this exercise. Say we want to display assets that the user owns, a list of assets, and we also want to show the user which one of these the user already owns, for example. And this data is in two different systems. There's no integration yet. There's no way to easily sort of pull this data together. So if we want to do that, if we want to display this data to the user, we need some type of integration to happen. And then I looked at the internal environment and realized that these were very, very expensive to do. And I've placed it here in custom build because these integrations were basically custom built every time. I saw this pattern that we had teams who, to create these integrations, they had to collaborate and custom sort of structure these integrations all the time. And so for this integration to actually happen in a common example, we would need some feature work by team A, and we would also need some feature work by team B. And for that to actually happen in this type of networked organization where all of these teams were never going to be in the same org, right? There were some different, capabilities sitting in different backend systems managed by different teams in different parts of the company. So for this integration to even happen, team B needs to actually have some trust in team A. Because if you're gonna invest time in the collaboration and build something that's needed for this high level feature, then you need that trust. And this is where I started looking at, okay, why are these integrations not happening, and realizing that trust was actually a kind of part of the value chain here. And so these teams need to trust each other. So team A, to do the feature work, they need to trust team B. And for team B to trust team A, they actually need, a time commitment from team A to develop, to do the feature work, like to actually schedule, like on somebody's sprint somewhere, the work needs to be scheduled. And it needs to be committed on some type of roadmap. The resources need to be sort of allowed to be allocated. And for that to happen, to even get to the place where you understand what it is that you need to build, each team first has to dedicate time for collaboration to even understand what we're building together. This is the type of collaboration that in the team topologies book, they talk about as kind of intense, like full collaboration that you want to do for short amounts of time to establish what you're doing together, and then hopefully sort of disengage. Because if you keep collaborating this heavily, it's very expensive, right? But we do need to dedicate some time to actually have this collaboration happen. And for that to even happen, the team has to actually have cognitive capacity to even understand what is the integration needed for what application feature, and what are the consequences for our system, and so on and so forth. And along with the commitment to develop, we also have this, commitment to support, because you don't just need the feature work to be done now, you also need to be supported in the future. And of course, we have the same need for across, for the other team. And every time these integrations had to be constructed like this in a custom way. And it can, of course, be debated how exactly to map this, what exactly depends on what. But this is how I broke down the problem to see, like, why are these integrations not happening? Because in this environment, what would happen was that teams evaluating application features here, they would see that an integration would be needed to have the feature happen. They would pretty quickly parse that all of these things would have to happen for the integration to even be possible. And they would actually just say no to the feature in the first place. So this feature would become a, if you t-shirt size things, this would be an XXXL feature because of all of this extremely fragile kind of value, like dependency chain. And it's not that it could be tiny, tiny feature work that was actually needed to bring these this data from two different systems together, but because it was so expensive to custom build the collaboration needed to actually make this happen, people would just say no. And it meant the consequence was that users would not get the features that were actually good for users, users would get, classic problem, you ship your org chart, users would get features that were possible for individual teams to build in isolation. And as the company was growing, this was clearly not what was needed. So by viewing the problem in this way, we could start talking about, okay, how can we evolve these things to make them cheaper? How can we reduce the cognitive capacity needed? We start at the bottom of the value chain, right? Right now, teams need kind of custom-made cognitive capacity, if you will, or they at least need, it's a different problem every time. So you need a lot of cognitive capacity. So question number one is like, okay, how can we reduce that? And by reducing the special kind of custom capacity that needs to be dedicated to this problem, how can we reduce the time needed for this intense collaboration where teams needed to engage? And how can we reduce the time for that? Now, of course, the time commitment to develop and to support will never really go away, because these are prioritizations that any company has to make. Like improving the value chain here will not, remove the need for a company to make prioritization. But if we could make this cheaper, our hypothesis was that we could then make these integrations as a whole cheaper, turn them from something that was like custom built every time to something that would basically be more of an off-the-shelf, or behave more as an off-the-shelf thing that was easier and cheaper to do, because more efficiency here, we hypothesized, would have new patterns evolve, where if these integrations were much cheaper to do, we would see way more of them, thus benefiting users, getting more features that are actually better for them, and not so much mapped to our particular ecosystem. So we were basically trying to start here at the bottom to see how can we reduce cognitive capacity here, and how can we sort of shift, these arrows are not behaving like I want to, but I think you get the point of basically how can we make these integrations way cheaper? How can we evolve them? And when we saw the problem in this way, we basically gave ourselves a compass in a way. We got a Y of purpose, which was make these integrations cheaper so that we get more of them because it's better for users. And then a Y of movement, which was about we need specifically to make these, we need to go down the value chain here and make this cheaper. And in this context, we saw that if we could, introduce, classic tactic here, of course, which is not going to be new to anyone who works in technology. This is the benefit of building, API platforms. But this solution had a proper why with this map, right? And we also could optimize features on this API platform. So we ended up building a GraphQL-based API platform because it helped us, by defining strong contracts between the teams. It helped them collaborate quickly for a short amount of time, and then disengage to build, client-side and back-end integrations or sort of features separately. But we did so, and the features we chose for this platform, we were specifically optimizing for reducing cognitive capacity needed for teams to understand how to work together, and reducing the time needed for this intense collaboration, so that we could get much quicker to having the work sort of agreed and prioritized, and having the integration as a whole be cheap enough for teams to start saying yes to this type of feature. So that's how we decided to build an API platform and prioritized its features after thinking of trust as a value chain problem.
Thank you. There is a first of all, there is a question in the chat which I think is pretty good. I think this is a chaos engineer in disguise. Have you considered being deliberately challenging as a strategy? Specifically says like punk music was deliberately not like 70s prog rock skilled musicianship. Now, I don't know if punk musicians were unskilled. I think that's a controversial topic in itself, but I think I understand what you mean. Any thoughts on that, first of all, in the general of being deliberately challenging?
I mean, I think that the challenge or the orthodoxy in this system that had to be overcome was actually to justify to the organization to build, to invest the time in building the platform and framework for these that would help people collaborate in this way. Because in this environment, like I said, we're kind of, optimizing for fast results within the sphere of control of individual teams. And in this environment, we're also pretty small, fast-growing company, but still resource constrained, basically justifying a team dedicated to making an API platform. Many leaders have seen, unfortunately, technologists be very excited about technology for its own sake. Many an engineer being very excited to build an API platform because, of course, engineers have a view where they see these inefficiencies, right? And they want to solve them, but it's not always clear to leaders, like, why, right? What am I getting for this investment, really, right? Why am I putting 3-4 engineers on making some platform thing? And this was a way to kind of frame this investment and saying, we have this, backlog of things that would be obviously useful to users that we are not building today. Here's why. And this is why this investment will basically unlock this type of feature. And so there was kind of, 2 orthodoxies that this helped me challenge. One was, don't invest in things that don't have sort of immediate and direct value. And B, don't do things with dependencies, right? And saying like, yes, we will do things with dependencies, but we will do it with support. We will do it with this framework to support so that those dependencies become cheap, easy, and sort of manageable. Because before this type of framework, the team that wanted to create the application feature, they somehow became responsible for all of this custom stuff because they cared, right? They were closest to the user. So they cared about the quality. And they also recognized the reason they t-shirt sized these as XXL was not just that they were hard to build in the first place, is because they couldn't necessarily control or trust the long-term commitment to support the integration. Then they couldn't guarantee quality to their end user. And that was another reason that they would say no. And so these were kind of 2 combined orthodoxies that I not challenged in a confrontational way, but basically by digging into by treating this as a trust as a value chain problem, we were able to dig into this and come up with solutions and show like, why would they improve the problem? Why is this not a sort of just a tech thing in a corner? Because engineers like APIs, how is this going to provide like tangible value to the business?
Damien, can I jump in here?
Go for it.
Andy, that was brilliant. I love it. And I think that I definitely would want to show this to jointly to our product and engineering teams, because I think this is a barrier that literally exists in so many teams, and making this process more effective and creating that trust basis unlocks so many things. But I was wondering whether, as a result of implementing this, did you get a multiplier effect, i.e., as you've unlocked how the technology approaches here and the collaboration approaches enabled you to see the product engineering tensions, I'd call them. Did you find that you found other things as a result of that? So did you end up with a different way in which the culture around the whole product engineering dynamic changed? Was this just the beginning of an understanding? Because it looks like it could be to me.
I mean, so at this point, we built the platform, it is in use and it is creating. I would say it's still, you know, obviously not the sort of fully concluded, but we are definitely seeing both the value of it and some new evolving patterns in the organization where people are using it to collaborate in new ways. So we're seeing collaborations that wouldn't have happened before, and we're seeing collaborations go faster and easier as more teams adopt this way of working together, because they can see the benefits. And I think that we've also seen some of the other things I wanted, and the reason we chose GraphQL was from thinking of a different kind of value chain, which was reusable features. Like if you do the work of integration once, how can you make sure that you don't have to do it again because you just have a slightly different use case? And this is what we've seen where GraphQL works really well as a kind of self-serve backend for front end. So patterns I was hoping to see that, okay, once we have GraphQL exposure for our courses that we have on our Learn website, for example, that we would see teams just grabbing those and displaying them in different contexts, because now this was free. Now you didn't even need an integration because somebody already did it for one purpose, to display them in our like launcher installer called the Hub. And now, as part of a hackathon, they were also pulled into a mobile app, for example. And this was so free, cheap and easy. Nobody had to ask. It had basically become, the integration had become completely self-serve in that way. And then we start to see these new types of patterns evolve. And I'm not sure that's exactly what you were asking, but—
No, it is, because what sits underneath this for me, there's an ROI, a genuine ROI, that the initial use case can be tested against what you've just described. And I think that that's a great way of making, a positive P&L type intervention from an engineering point of view, to say, look, the reason we did this is the ROI is, and that would open up other possibilities about how you might apply this trust-based thinking. So that's really the reason I was asking, because I know every CFO would want that number, and you would have, from an engineering point of view, a much easier time to get things agreed, and a tighter coupling between the product and the engineering components of the teams within the company. So yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Andy.
So look, Andy, you've caused a storm. There's a whole load of commentary in the chat, a couple of questions on Q&A. I'm wondering, do you want to pick a question? I think you're probably better qualified to decide what's an interesting question, and perhaps come back to some of the other ones in the larger Q&A at the end.
I think we've answered a few questions now. Why don't we hear Jackie's talk, and then we can all have a big panel party afterwards with all the questions that people have, and I'll also hang around afterwards. I'm happy to chat about this any day of the week.
Brilliant. Jackie, over to you. I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to let you do that yourself. Okay,
thank you. I'm the thing I need to say, let me just try and share my screen. That I need to tell you first off is I'm visually disabled. Can you see my screen now?
We can.
Right, so I've got 4 screens here to do what I'm doing today. So the introduction from me, I've put in my slides. So I'm not live mapping. So if you're all really disappointed, I'm very sorry. It probably become evident as to why when I say it, mainly because I want to share my slides, and so anybody that also has some sort of accessibility issue gets to see everything. So I just want to say good morning to everybody. Already fascinated by the discussion, can't wait to pull this all together. So I'm the co-founder of Flying Binary. We're a web science company. We're focused on inclusion. And by that, I mean leave no one behind. And we're changing the world to leverage the industrial Internet of Things with deep tech. So last year at MapCamp, I spoke about mapping and government research I'd been involved in with Simon. And this year I've been expanding my work to challenge the orthodoxy, my general way of doing things across 180 nations. And I've based the approach that I'm doing this year to leverage the way in which, as the co-founder of the data journalism industry, I challenge orthodoxy. So basically what that means is I've been following the money that each government spends on procurement. Just to tell you a little bit about the company though, as international web scientists that have pioneered this approach to orthodoxy, we have 34 million citizens in Flying Binary that inform our web science research, and I would say hold our feet to the fire. The industrial Internet of Things is an engineering challenge, but the key thing for me is has a societal impact, and that's where our inclusion mission comes from. Since we were formed in 2009, we focused all of our attention in building the deep tech for Generation Z. Gen Z are 28 to 18 today, and since 2020 have been influencing that 40% of the economic power. So it was time to challenge 180 nations. And in my Davos speech in January 2019, I said, we're no longer building deep tech to that agenda. We're building for Gen Alpha, 70 to 7, although we do have some Gen Beta as young as 5 that are involved in what we're doing, because they have very different requirements for the industrial Internet of Things. Outrage from Gen Z, what do you mean you're leaving us behind? But the reality of it is they're quite capable of pushing the agenda they need to push. One of the things I want to say is we're a GovTech 100 company credited with the transformation or using technology for the UK government, and that's with a collection of interoperable cloud services. And I'm one of the original G-Cloud Zero team that challenged the orthodoxy to get us to there. And we've literally built everything until Brexit to meet the European procurement rules. So what we built for the UK was automatically available to the EU 27. But the reality of it is we don't use the EU-US Privacy Shield. We do when we're required to, but we don't recommend it. And as expert advisors you see on the list there, that's what I'm going to talk about today. I do need to clear this up though, because I got lots of questions last time, a number of discussions in the post presentation. Deep tech comes from Swati Chaturvedi. He's the co-founder and CEO of the investment organization Propel. And deep tech companies are based on substantial scientific advances. In our case, the web science that we pioneered since working with Tim Berners-Lee in 2009, and the high-tech engineering innovation. Both co-founders of Fly Binary engineers. I'm an aerospace engineer and Ian is an electrical engineer. And the key thing about deep tech companies is what we produce and what we deliver requires lengthy R&D, usually a long time to get to commercial application, and large investments to get that commercial success. But the key thing is for us as companies, deep tech companies, the underlying IP of what we build is well protected, hard to reproduce, and gives us a strong competitive advantage from what we call the 800-pound gorillas with the cash. Flying Binary is the exception on both of those counts from what Swati said. We've never taken investment in the 12 years since we founded, and we were profitable in month 1. And pioneering the fundamental web science that underpins that and architecting the sustainable cloud services is why. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is my view of challenging orthodoxy. I think this is what supposedly there isn't a definition, so I've made one up based on some research, but challenging the orthodoxies that technology utilizes is what I've been about always. I've made a career out of it. Initially as an aerospace engineer that challenged the way in which computing was done, and part of the team that brought software engineering to our industry. And from my own personal point of view, the business plan I created from that to address the societal impact of noise pollution by the aircraft we built, solved by the creation of the BA 146 Whisperjet. I still get to fly in her regularly, so I love that. Through to the founding of the empathy economy in 2016, which was my response to the Brexit argument, discourse, nearer argument, I think. And of course, today showing you how I've done that in both the European Union work and the UN work that I do. So if anybody that's listening was here last year, I thought I'd better put this slide in. Because I left you last year saying, okay, I've delivered the G20 plan. We've got a 3-year plan. They pushed me for 5. I pushed them back for 3 to generate the growth agenda, or to realize the growth agenda for the industrial and Internet of Things, with the core proposition being deep tech. And that was based on the services we delivered, and the world's first smart cities are in public and private sector in the smart city domain. But one particular thing that came out of last year's presidency for the G20 was the UK, it turned out, when I did the assessments for each G20 member, was the only one that recognised the critical national infrastructure component of the future digital economies. And so part of the plan I delivered was to address that gap for the other G20 members. And if you sort of keep an eye on that whole critical national infrastructure piece across the world, you'll see G20 members have been addressing that in terms of that change. And the G20 plan, as we started the delivery of that 3-year process, the pandemic hit. And so the 4.4% growth plan that I had on average across the G20 members, it turned out it was a COVID plan. And we began implementing the changes that we said we would gear up across a troika of 3 G20 presidencies in 3 months. So completely changed my world as well as our world. One area that I particularly focused on, and I've put a lot of material out there, is that the G20 team from Europe immediately adopted that G20 plan. And I've been appointed as a European expert advisor to shape the policy agenda over the next 7 years. That meant I got to swap my agent provocateur role in the EU, which I was quite fond of. Generally, I took that to mean troublemaker, although it's not a straight translation, to be one of the 4 EU fire starters. That's actually a promotion. Don't like the title, but I hold the pen for changing the outcomes for 450 million EU citizens by the challenge to the orthodoxy that I've set in there. And we've transitioned how we implement the industrial Internet of Things from a user needs agenda to an inclusion agenda. And that's the next steps policy that we've already outlined, and I've put material out there, and also has led on to us abandoning the idea of delivery models based around smart cities, but directing everything to sustainable communities. And one of the things, the real core of that plan, is that we will deliver 100 different climate neutral cities. We've got 99 signed already and delivering, which gives us 100 different strategic approaches and climate neutral models to plan the next steps for Europe's 95,000 sustainable communities. So that challenging orthodoxy and that picking up what I'd done in the G20 was ratified by European Council in October, and caused Simon to say, "You are such a troublemaker." And I did have to remind him I wasn't agent provocateur anymore. I was a fire starter, so I'm not officially a troublemaker anymore in the EU. But he was pushing back on me, saying, "But that's the EU 27. There's nobody from the UK in council." It's like, well, yeah, because the UK's got a different plan. So this was the Wardley map that effectively underpinned the reboot of, the evidence about what was wrong and the ongoing plan for each G20 member. And it was also the start of the next steps agenda. So when you pull your mapping collateral together, moving it between nation states, as I'm doing, or sectors, doesn't mean to say that you necessarily have to have a different start point if you're actually looking at challenging the norm. And the norm I've challenged is the sharing economy, but I'll talk about that a bit later. So what happened next was completely unexpected. I was doing what I was doing, having quite a good time and all the rest of it. And then I got a call from U4SSC, which is the 180 members of the United Nations that are looking to smart cities delivery models, saying not inclusion, Jackie, leaving all of us behind. And that's fair, but their initial piece was, we can demonstrate that Wardley map for the rest of us too, so you need to give us a G20 plan. It doesn't actually work like that. And so it was a much more complex problem so G20 is 60% of the world's GDP. It's a much more complex problem to solve that for the rest of the nations. So what we first had to do was decide on a focus. So I was appointed an expert advisor to the four hands, U4SSC, and then every other logo on here, we had to effectively challenge all the assumptions, all the thinking about how we would solve this. And what we actually agreed was we needed a focus, one thing, let's pick one thing. And as I explained at the beginning, I'm a data journalist and I've had real success with follow the money approaches. So you'll have seen the Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, and of course the Pandora Papers, and not the ones that we're still working on. So that's what we did. We said, that's our focus. Let's look at where the money is in all of this, and let's challenge that orthodoxy. So we focused on 13 trillion annual global procurement spend, and we changed the paradigm of what we do with that. I obviously, from a UN point of view, we'll talk about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You may not have seen this diagram before. Usually what gets presented with the UN SDGs is a flat piece of 17 boxes, all brightly coloured, with all the numbers and everything you see here, but not this piece. And this was one of the first things that I wanted to challenge, because I knew that was, we're not driving adoption, and the climate challenge is our biggest challenge in my view. And so this is the new approach that we came up with. I must credit my colleagues in Sweden, who we've done a lot of work on resilience because of climate the climate change that Sweden's experiencing. And essentially this turns on its head what we normally do with the UN SDGs, because this depicts the way in which economies and societies are embedded components of the biosphere. So it takes an approach that views those economies and those societies embedded in the biosphere, not separate, and what is actually happening, competing pillars. So it implies that the transition towards sustainability and the change we need to make from a climate action point of view is that the economy serves society, so it evolves within the planetary boundaries. And this, and the work that underpins all of this, is the reason I got my hands on $13 trillion. So what did we do? It's hard, and I've only got a few minutes. So what I wanted to do is to say, we've effectively got sets of maps that underpin all these 10 things, because we had to say, when you're buying technology, what is it you think you're doing, and map all of that. What is it we should be doing? What are the principles under which we should be changing the way we commission ICT in any shape or form? In the UN, ICT is the sort of name, not tech. But essentially that actually gave us a huge conversation around values. And this essentially is the end of the sharing economy, where technology has been the outcome, to what I call the empathy economy, where technology is the enabler. And so in order to reposition the money, we had to take these views. This is a whole half a day thing, but in summary, the future digital economies have had a reboot from the user need to an inclusion agenda, because this is what this enables. So the work's ongoing. We're currently creating the next steps for the next year, because each time we unpack this a little bit more, we're able to create a consensus. We don't have agreement across 180 nations. The whole thing about challenging orthodoxy, from my point of view, is it's a progressive journey. And whilst we have no dissenters on the values or the principles that we're using, the way in which we implement is still up for debate. And then the pandemic hit. So we had to say, well, stop the world, because what we have now is we have on the ground changes of that spend of $13 trillion. it's being spent in a completely different way than anybody's spending it before. And we created a new procurement practice, which we call emergency buying. And these are the governments that we source that new practice from. We ended up having to develop the workflow in order to understand how to leverage both the traditional and the next gen approaches to procurement products. Basically, I'm telling you, it all got more complicated just because it did. So this is where we started to create a series of maps, because you can't do 180 countries change all at once. And somebody has to step forward to say, do it to me then. So this is the landscape of UK Her Majesty's Government's procurement, which is currently a traditional and next-gen model. I need to say right now, every map's imperfect. And essentially, I want to show you also how messy it is in order to create the initial communication about what we need to do. But it's how complex it is how a map gives me the context and helps me understand, communicate the opportunities, because this is a very strategic way of, the question that was in the chat earlier, strategic way of unlocking challenging orthodoxy. And we had to effectively create a new approach to government procurement in the UK, even though we'd reinvented it back in 2010. This was now time to change. Now, I can only really unpack a couple of aspects of this because it's hugely complex. So I wanted to focus on this, the key changes, and I call this my net zero map because that's the focus we've chosen as part of Follow the Money. So the next steps for procurement, which is being led by the UK, is to translate those new practices into procurement products, make the change so that every penny of 290 billion UK government spending will underpin this to drive the net zero agenda. And it started. We started it, we closed the doors at the end of August, and from the 1st of September 2021, we are on a set of interventions to make sure that every penny of 290 billion UK government spending drives net zero. So it's complex, conscious of time. So I wanted to just bring two pieces out of this to say, how does it link back to the UN piece? How do we get this 13 trillion spend reset? One of them's workflow. We had to agree across all 180 nations, given the commissioning principles that we created, how we did it. And so essentially there's 4 components of that workflow, which I'm just pulling out like as a highlight from that map to enable the commissioning of government services. And we've agreed on planning, informing the market, evaluation and award, and managing delivery. And that approach takes the commissioning principles and works for all traditional and next-gen practices for all the UN members. And the second piece is back specifically to the UK procurement. We've had to create a new marketplace, which looks at, these are I'm highlighting the net zero assessment criteria here. How do we do that? What does it look like for all contract delivery? And it's across the supply chain for every penny of that 290 billion procurement spend in the UK. But it's done in three stages. We've created 3 different scopes. So from the 1st of September, all contracts that are awarded, that have been awarded for 5 million to any supplier to Her Majesty's Government are in scope 1. The key thing I want to do a bit of myth busting here. There's been no adverse impact on SMEs, and in fact the reverse, because the UK government has as a principle of enabling the SME market. 95% of our GDP is generated in that market, so really key. And the 2 things that everybody has to do, they're qualifications for a contract. You don't get it awarded and get to do it. You don't get the contract without doing it. Publish a carbon reduction plan in public on your website, saying how you're going to achieve carbon neutral, net zero by 2050, and measure the carbon emissions and declare them. Scope 2 will go live in 2022. And I've accepted a 2-year appointment back in the UK's Cabinet Office. For those of you who know me, you know that I left in 2015 to go on and do my global work, where we're going to create the open standards that are needed to underpin these new procurement practices. And as ever, when I'm doing something like this at this sort of level, I've got a million questions. I know some of you have got answers to those million questions. So if you think you can help with this, get in touch. If you'd like to know more, then equally get in touch. And then just 3 tips I wanted to, in listening to people during the mapping exercises, I want to say, number 1, never map alone. Huge thanks to Steve Perkins, who I know you're here today, Steve. Fantastic to see you, for his help to create these maps from all the landscape and material I had. And he now knows far more about global procurement than he ever wanted to, but he's been a fantastic challenge to how I could present this material in a short amount of time. Number 2, what I've learned with working with all 180 nations is always map. Wordly mapping is the only way I've ever found to capture situational awareness, but communicate it with the audience, always important, but bring them along with you. It's the bring them along with you that is really hard to understand. And the other thing, which is a tip based on, you know, the oversight I have across the way the world's changing and the next steps I'm already doing, is start mapping now. And the reason for that is the industrial internet of things isn't just a technology change, as I said before, it's societal, but it's enabled by technology. And the empathy economy approach, which I've talked through you today, this is some of the core principles around that. It replaces the sharing economy, where technology wasn't an enabler, it was an outcome. And you'll need to map this change for your organizations. If you're, you know, that situational awareness is needed by every organization. And thanks very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jackie. Exactly what I expected, which one of the comments, there is so much in what Jackie does. It often takes 1 or 2 passes to really be able to get the scale of what Jackie's trying to do in many of her programs, but then also to really understand where the impact is going to be. And just thinking about all of the talks that we've had. So we're talking about the general, we've had a sort of circumspective journey through a couple of viewpoints on the general area of challenging orthodoxy. And one of the things that came out to me was just articulation. In every one of these cases, there is somebody to be influenced, and the map has been a way of articulating what needs to happen. In Andy's particular case, I was looking at this and thinking, well, yeah, this is really about articulating what you need to do to build the trust and create a program which built in people's understanding and knowledge. So you basically creating trust to extract the value that people's knowledge and understanding around these integrations in order to enable them to happen. With Jackie, you're dealing with massive supranational projects with end goals that sometimes may seem so removed from the day-to-day actions or the people who you might actually need to influence. And same again, when you get into the Julius's area of human interaction, there is it's an absolutely huge area, super complex, and is now starting to make me really rethink certain aspects, because I've always been mapping the static, the things that I've always been drawn to because they're easy to measure, computers, physical things that can, you know, that have discrete value, or at least aren't as changeable as humans, human intent, etc. So some really great questions. I'm sorry, Jackie, during that I got this warning telling us that the whole thing was shutting down at 10 o'clock. It was an entire mistake, but that's why I hurried you along a little bit, and then realized, no, we've got loads of time for the question and answer like we planned. So I'm going to allow any of the speakers to dive back into their slides to sort of revisit anything that we need to. We have loads and loads of questions, and I feel that I'd be a bottleneck if I was the one to try and pick these. So we have some in the chat. We also have 2 other panelists. I'm going to let you just feel free. So first of all, on everything Jackie's just talked about, Julius, Andy, if you could start any burning questions, ideas, thoughts, and then we'll open that out to the general floor and take through some of the questions in Q&A as well.
I'm really curious when listening to you, Jackie, I guess there's maybe no brief version of it, but I'm really curious how more precisely you arrived at procurement as such a key, because it seems super obvious when you talk through it that unless that's where it happens, it's kind of where rubber meets the road about how these investments happen. But how did you arrive at identifying procurement as such a crucial component?
It's a really good question, because I think when the UN contacted me saying, right, okay, we need you over here, and you say on every stage we've ever heard, inclusion, leave no one behind, you just left 40% of the world's GDP behind. Fair question, fair challenge. I think what they had in mind was, I take that G20 plan and translate it. That actually isn't possible, because of there's a whole maturity curve that sits alongside here. And so we had a really in-depth debate about how do you even begin to ask the question to get the answer to what you've just said. And, obviously I'm a science diplomat, I haven't said that in anything. So I work around the world in order to create consensus. But when you're challenging orthodoxy, that doesn't help you. And being very respectful for the cultures and all the rest of it, I got to a point where I laid down some of the principles that underpinned the G20 plan and said, quite frankly, I think we should put those in the bin, because what we're talking about here is we have to find something that unlocks this agenda for you all. And when I look at the non-G20 members of this whole piece, there isn't anything that aligns you. And we can't federate it on smart cities, because we've proven that with the G20 plan. That doesn't deliver net zero, and it's the only thing anybody's focused on. And so having had that debate, they said, have you got any ideas? I said, well, I co-founded the data journalism industry on the basis of, let's follow the money. So let's do that. And so then it was a question of, do we even know across the nations how that is done? And we didn't. And so there was a whole exercise, I think took about 6 months to actually understand that. And 5 nations who represented that spectrum of change were fantastic in supporting unlocking that for their 5 nations, so that we could see effectively 5 different strategies that all had nothing in common. And then from that, the 10 principles were developed. And, the acid test is actually getting the nations to say, and this would work for you or this would not. And so we're just finalizing all of that at the moment. And then we will in December put the roadmap together for all 180. So you can't solve all of that with mapping, because you have to, it is a consensus making activity. And there's a huge amount of diplomacy involved in that. But it's the leave no one behind piece that mattered the most. How did we find something that did that? And we had many candidates on the table, but repositioning $13 trillion every year to deliver climate change was something everybody agreed on. So that's essentially how we drew it together. But obviously the interventions for each nation is different. And so I wanted to show you the UK one, which has been built within the G7 negotiations we've done, because obviously the maturity curve is how ready are you? The UK has already junked its entire procurement once before on a set of principles. These are the new principles. And then the forcing function is delivering net zero. So effectively we said, this is how we did it. And then for those countries that can just pick that up and lift it, they will do that. And for others, we'll need to do some deeper work to understand. Yes, Niall, I know. The sorts of numbers that I deal with at this level, I've only given you one aspect of it. It's actually a much bigger number, but it's where we're starting, because climate action is the key thing that links us all. But you have to know what to do about it. And the SDGs have been around a long time and they haven't created the impact we needed. So we've taken a new approach to how we deliver and implement the UN SDGs for 2030. And then each nation's done its own intervention, and we will end up with a series of things that can only be rippled across each individual nation, but that can be shared across them all. So it'll be a co-production, co-learning environment for all the nations. Long explanation because it's complicated, Andy, but it's a really good question. In outline, that's how I did it.
It's really interesting to me because of my day job. I'm interested in what specifically provoked Andy to ask that. In my day job, what I see is procurement, which sometimes involves legal, lots of people who are effectively in an organization to police people's ability to deliver value. And to me, that falls right into what Andy was talking about. It's about trust. So because of what I deal a lot with organizations in enabling sustainability. And one of the challenges I find is I'm always in a room with one company, not with a whole consortium like Jackie is. And most of the time we'll have a conversation, we'll come for a very clear idea as to what we should be doing. And then we go through the procurement challenge, which is often the deal breaker. It's very often the least valuable part of the process, in that sometimes it's 60, 70% of a sales cycle. Really interesting stuff. 13 trillion. If you need any help spending that for a small commission, you can always come to me.
Under the rules I operate under as a member of the Cabinet Office, I think that's not likely to happen. We'll go through the process, and it's all done in a transparent way. So having come back into Cabinet Office, I'm very familiar with that. But I'm sure that we will have conversations, and either you'll ask questions or I will, and we'll help with the answer. And I think the reality of it is we unlock it at this level so that the conversations you're having, Damien, automatically get unlocked. The way the UK's moved now on this to deliver the net zero agenda means that if you have any part of the work you're doing that's involved in any part of the value chain for government, it's been changed for you now. It's already changed since the 1st of September. So it may well be we've unlocked some of it already.
Yeah, funny comment.
I have a question for
please go ahead, Julius.
For Jack. That was so now you're starting with user needs as the first step in this procurement cycle. What was the starting point before your work, and how did you get everyone to just agree on this one principle? Start with user needs.
No, we didn't. We're not starting with user needs. We're delivering it on the inclusion agenda. So I can give you a European answer to that, because some of that's in the public domain. The UN piece isn't, because we're still navigating some of this. But in Europe, I hold the pen for changing the outcomes of 450 million citizens in the EU 27. And we have 80 million of those citizens that have some accessibility needs by challenge or by choice. That means that if we didn't consider that inclusion as a driver, as the forcing function, we would leave 80 million citizens behind. So we've moved the way in which we approach this strategically from a user needs agenda to an inclusion agenda. And essentially that's turned most of the ways and approaches we do things on its head. It's actually been quite a dramatic change from a policy making point of view, and the way in which we'll deliver that 1.8 trillion euro budget. It has been a severe challenge to everybody. We've reorganized the European Commission, Parliament's had to be involved, councils had to be involved, all the EU institutions have had to be reformed, and because inclusion drives you as a forcing function, drives you to very different outcomes. And of course that is Flying Boundaries' mission, so that's something I care about passionately.
A couple of questions for Julius. What I'm going to try and do is to wrap them up into one question, because I was kind of thinking of this. So you gave us a way of visualizing, thinking about a specific interaction, so a conflict that we're anticipating with somebody. That's a singular conflict. There was an earlier question around punk rock and basically doing this just almost constantly, a sort of chaos monkey type, just constantly always pushing the barrier. And there's a question here which is related to that. mapping can be, further up. So asking for some real live examples on how you use the map to initiate change. So I was wondering about two things. One is yes, if you do make yourself this agent of change who's always pushing at the boundary and always finding that conflict, what does that do for your relationship with people? Is there sort of a diminishing value? The first time you look to change something, hey, that's great. But once you've got a reputation for being this person, perhaps it changes that map. It makes it harder to do so. And yeah, so I was, to the first one I mentioned, which was just that this was a visualization. Do you have some just practical examples of little stories of where you actually had a conflict, or maybe what we could draw from that in the conflicts or disagreements we might have?
Yeah, so one thing I forgot to mention was all these things. Okay, what I've mapped is making some of these processes explicit, but in our teams, we disagree with people every single day at every single time. So for me, when it's a delicate situation, when it's I don't know how to phrase that other than making it very delicate, that's when I get onto these maps and map these kind of things. So in our teams, there's sometimes you have someone who just complains a lot about every single thing, and that just tanks the morale of the whole team. And so, okay, it's not here on the map, but building up this harmony within the team allows us to move faster. So I need to have the conversation with these kinds of people. And so I do the map, and I especially use this change matrix from Goldratt, because not only if we are changing or not changing, he brings in also things like there are these layers of resistance. So every quadrant has a resistance. Either we don't agree that there is a problem. If we do agree there's a problem, the solution might not give us the outcome that we want. And then if we do implement the solution, then it comes with its own problems. So every one of these layers, it's something to overcome. So me personally, dealing with interpersonal things, that's the hardest thing for me. So then I map this and make sure, okay, if I say you do X and it irritates me, do I have the X right, and do you agree? So those are on the interpersonal level. When it comes to being a change agent, I always fall back to Goldratt's change matrix and the layers of resistance. So because I can take this and ask someone, okay, look, you don't want to change, that's fine. I myself also sometimes don't want to change, but these are the problems that we are having. Do you agree? Because what I'm going for is, yes, I do agree. Then at least we've agreed there's a problem. So that's all I can say on that side. So it's making explicit what we already do every day.
That's really good. I think that answers the question well. So that's something I need to look more into Goldratt personally, and just really understand that. So once you've mapped the disagreement, how do you now map the interchange, the exchange you have with the person, and also correctly interpret the things they come from? I think a big part of my doubt comes in terms of two people with the same opinion or objection may express it very differently. And so am I measuring the strength of their feeling on their expression, or adding in their personality, etc.? So I think that will probably help. Jackie, I wonder in the last few minutes if you don't mind expanding on your answer to Chris in the chat. I'll read it out and read out your initial answer. Maybe you can just add to that. And now I've lost my ability to read. So Chris says, this whole speech had a lot of assumed knowledge about the UK and the UN. It's hard to pinpoint a single question. The word inclusion is used here in a way that I'm not familiar with. And you've come back and answered. I won't read your answer. I'll just let you sort of riff on that. Do you want to just explain or talk through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Christoph, you make a really good point. We've since 2010, and particularly in the environment where I was working for this first focus of procurement, we've put a lot of emphasis on user needs. I'm not saying we don't do that anymore, but as the example I gave from a European point of view, if that was what we were using as a forcing function for the change for the EU 27, we would have disinherited 80 million of our citizens. So we've reset that to be user needs are important, but inclusion and actually understanding the value chain, because I answered another question for Stu on that, is key, because do you know where technology is disinheriting it? And from a UN point of view, do you know the adverse SDGs that are happening as a result of your intervention? Because one of the things that we've struggled with to see the impact and the outcomes from the SDGs is we haven't looked at it from a point of view of what the unintended consequences might be to climate. And so the combination of a net zero focus, but a forcing function of inclusion. I mean, I have the evidence base of 34 million citizens to challenge lots of the stories that go around that. And also we have technology to reach out if we needed to into, I don't know, Ghana or Malaysia, to ask the population of those nations to say, we want some wicked questions answered. Can you give us some of your thoughts? So I think it's a combination of things, but I wanted it to come across that one of the key points we've learned as a result of this exercise is just focusing on user needs hasn't been enough because of the unintended consequences of that. And so therefore an inclusion agenda, and specifically understanding who you leave behind, who you might disinherit, what the unintended consequences of what you're doing is, has been a really key learning point for all of us in this exercise. So as we plan the rollout next year for 2022 at the end of this year, that's going to drive the way we prioritize that rollout.
Well, we've got quite a bit to get through. Thanks again, Jackie, but I'm going to rattle through because I want as many people to have a question answered. Andy, I really want to hear the answer to this because I've experienced that. Show people a map, people see work. I need to understand that. I need somebody to explain that. That's already some inertia. So you went and you basically didn't use the map in the negotiation. Talk us through that.
I mean, I've found that that's very often the case, that you want to map. I mean, there are different ways to collaborate using mapping. I think there are cases where leaders need to map a space together to build a strategy. But I think that very often you actually need to map the landscape with, like, it's a kind of, you know, the doctrine of like understand the details is that you have to have like real expertise in the room to map the actual details of a subspace, right? What matters for that space. And this is where we bring, like, this, my favorite quote from Gregory Bateson is like, information is, you know, it's a difference that makes a difference. And I find that this is often the challenge in mapping, is to map the things that actually matter. Because very often people will try to map everything, or they will try to make, you know, a very accurate technical representation of some system. And in most cases, to understand how to move, you only really need to map the moving parts. Yeah. And this you can do in detail with kind of a small group. And from doing that, you will learn some things and you will have some outcomes. And usually you don't have to show the map to communicate those. You can just bring the key insights. Like the key insights for me was like, okay, you know, I dug in and understood trust as a value chain problem, but coming out of that, like I was saying in chat, all I really needed to say to communicate to the bigger picture in the organization and convince people of was that these things that are clearly beneficial for users that we want to have, we are not doing them today because they are too expensive. I've thought about why they're too expensive, and it's because of the heavy collaboration that's needed to make them happen. And that means teams are saying no before they even build them. And here's a solution to that, basically. And again, I didn't have to show the map to anyone. and really a lot of this knowledge where I've built knowledge in mapping and understanding some principles, doctrine, and the climatic patterns around evolution. And if you can create efficiency, you'll see new patterns emerge. All of this I built into, I put into how I told the story, but I didn't need to show it to anyone. So I think that this is where very often our own excitement for mapping can actually get in the way of using it effectively in organizations, because this is a cognitive load problem. So this problem is, if you first have to explain mapping for it to then be valuable, you've eaten all the cognitive capacity, or people will always almost bounce off before you get to the valuable parts, because you're so excited for the value of it that I just have to explain to you how cool this is and what happens and like how much insights we have and how this is totally different from everything else. And, you're so kind of excited for the format, and you've spent the cognitive capacity that the person had. And
you spend your social capital as well.
Yeah, and you spent your social capital too, right? And I think that cognitive capacity or cognitive load is that has been a transformational concept for me in relation to mapping from the Team Topologies book, is to really think about people and teams' cognitive capacity, and also think about how it changes depending on, well, you're choosing to invest it. If I come to someone in an organization, they're choosing if they're going to invest their cognitive capacity on whatever it is that I'm bringing to them based on the perceived value of it.
Yeah.
Right. So if I lose them in the first, 15 minutes of explaining something extremely conceptual that has no clear value yet, they are probably going to withdraw the investment that they had initially granted me because of some basic trust in the organization or openness to collaboration, but it can be withdrawn. So that's why I really think about how to get immediately to some of the value without needing to explain. And again, it's also power dynamic, because if you first need to explain mapping, you put focus on the person with the mapping expertise, and everybody else feels stupid because they feel like they don't get it because it's a lot. And you're not going to contribute when you feel stupid. So the challenge here is to make people feel smart, because they have the expertise, they have the knowledge, and often I will just map with people. And if I have a map since before, I will do what I did in this talk, which is to map it out live, because I find that it's extremely difficult to understand a map that's all there. And it's super enlightening when you talk through the actual flow that you have, or value chain that you have mapped. Then everybody's with you, everybody gets it. But you have to take the time to do that, and you have to have the tool that supports it, which is why this kind of map as code is super powerful, because you can so easily, this was Adrian did this. I saw this the first time, Adrian doing it last year here at Map Camp. And it's super, super powerful. I've done it in the past with like PowerPoint presentations where you just use the animations to, bring in the components, but this is way easier.
Yeah, I'll have to, I agree with Andy on that point about not explaining the map at the beginning. So 60 to 70% of my work is just that. Just give the summary, show the findings, and then they're like, wow, where did you get that? Then, then you can follow up later. But usually it's that's the way it starts. And then you just see this light bulb moment in their eyes. Oh, you understand the problem. Oh,
and very often people have enough contextual understanding that when you explain the findings of the mapping session or the outcome of the mapping session, people know enough about the area to kind of reality check what you're telling them. Like, if you're basically saying, well, we're doing this custom today and we really shouldn't be, then people can go like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Because they have enough contextual knowledge. They don't actually need to see the whole map. If they're in a field, if they're in a domain, they will just intuitively kind of, agree with a sense-making finding. They wouldn't necessarily have arrived there themselves without mapping, but now that you tell them, they can nod along, right? And they didn't need it spelled out in detail. That's at least my experience.
So quick note to everybody, just take a moment. There's so much valuable stuff, links, definitions that everybody's been putting in, and thanks everyone for just mucking in like that. That'll be really useful, especially anyone new to mapping. Totally agree, and I love that conversation. That jumped out to me because a map is really useful in my sense making. Why should customer do X or Y? It's toxic to take into the meeting for all the reasons that you mentioned. I do have a little trick where in the days when I did try and show people maps, I used to tell them the specific thing that they told me that made me put a component down. So I had a map which had quotes on it, and it was, you told me this 6 months ago. And that kind of works to sort of it sort of works to, I want to say, remove the elevation, make it a little bit more accessible to the person and understand that it relates to them. But I think we're now up in terms of time. That was a fantastic session. There are loads of questions. I would encourage everybody follow on Twitter, LinkedIn, every one of the speakers. Today is the first part in a journey in understanding some of what you've heard. It's not that you should understand everything and consume it all in one go. Everything's recorded, it's going to be on video, and would invite you to also let other people know what you've seen today if it's of interest to them, and share it around. Thanks everyone, thanks to our panelists. That was just a brilliant session. And I don't know what happens if I shut this down. Should we just keep talking until we force out? Or?
Damien, Jane's asked us if we can go to the networking area straight
networking area. Thank you for that.
And ask questions.
Brilliant. So I'll close the room. Thanks everyone for attending and for taking part. That was really good. Yes, anyone email me about bikes. I'll talk all day about bikes.